Welcome back to Shat on TV Game of Thrones Edition, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the juggernaut HBO series Game of Thrones. I'm one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me is my co-host, Big D, Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
This is our Instacast episode where we share our quick takes just minutes after this week's episode of Game of Thrones. This week's episode was entitled Beyond the Wall, where Jon's mission continues north of the wall, but the odds against his ragged band of misfits may be greater than he imagined. Big D, first thoughts.
My first thoughts are it was a bit of humble pie that was served. Most of the complaints that we had last week about the group heading north was answered with some fantastic dialogue. So I really like the episode. I think it's strong. It's going to be interesting to see what the audience as a whole takes. I could see some people just calling BS, some people having a problem just with the ending and the way some of the relationships have quickly shifted. I liked it, but what do you think the general take is going to be?
I think overall people will like it. I mean, I think it was a great mix, kind of like you said after episode 5. It was a very good mix of plot development, character development, some action. Little things were far-fetched, but other things really hit home. For me, when we complain about this show, I almost feel like it's a little prayer, and I feel like this episode answered a lot of those prayers.
Yeah, and I'm happy to say I'm glad that this ridiculous plan that everyone thought was just destined to fail did fail. It was so much better to have, and we know it's a plot device, that they needed to be stuck out there to get Daenerys to come in with a miracle rescue, but if they had somehow made Jon's plan to capture a white and it didn't run into problems, that would have been ridiculous. I was actually entertained all the way through with the plan, the way it fell apart, the way they got stuck. So I was really happy with the episode.
A lot of people might have looked at this and said it's a bit far-fetched they came out with so few losses, in the sense that overall everybody came out okay. But when you think about it, this was a victory. If you were trying to add up the score here, the Night King gets a dragon, and the good guys get one white. That's what they came out of there with.
God, you talk about losing a fan favorite. The show still firmly has its grip on my heart as I'm watching the episodes. Tormund has some great dialogue in the beginning. He's classic Tormund. He has me laughing. That scene where he almost goes in the water, I thought he was done. I was like, fuck, we're going to lose Tormund. And thankfully he survived, but that the show could still, at this point, dangle your favorite characters out there and you don't know who's going to survive, who's going to die. I love it as much as I hate it.
Yeah, we see that a lot with The Walking Dead. You used to know if they did an in-depth episode on somebody's character and made you like them a lot, that they were probably going to die very soon. And then they just stopped killing off anybody that people liked. On this show, again, I thought Tormund was screwed. I thought the Hound, at one point, I thought I saw him go down, and then I realized, no, he's all right. Again, I think all we can really talk about with the one guy who miraculously, whether it's by divine providence or not, survives, Jon Snow has had about as many brushes with death as possible.
He really has. Maybe he doesn't need to be brought back. He just can't be killed. I think there's going to be some small gripes from the audience as a whole. This is coming off of Bronn and Jaime's miraculous water escape. You throw in another one that's even more difficult. You can't swim in all that animal fur. There's probably about 8 to 10 whites on top of him. Somehow he escapes onto the ice. Didn't need to do it. I'm curious to see what people think. Uncle Benjen again compounds it by making another miracle appearance and rescue. But the only problem I really had was, did the Night King, was he part of the track team in college?
Yeah, that is a miraculous javelin throw. I think you pointed out that the distance he followed was farther than the Scorpion could launch.
Yeah, I would have been more afraid of that than the Scorpion. And I'm going to talk later on one of the topics that I think possibly everything we've been seeing on screen isn't necessarily happening by chance, that maybe there was some planning that went into this and it could have been a trap, but you didn't need to throw that thing like 300 yards, and that was a missile. But thankfully, Dany has learned from her last encounter with the Scorpion, you got to zigzag. When you're up there, you got to try to turn, become unpredictable, and that was something that Rickon could have used in Battle of the Bastards.
One of the things we can't forgive, when we talked about Jaime and Bronn's miraculous water escape, we know there's nothing really supernaturally special about these guys. So when you see the Night King throw a spear that far, a javelin that far, it's plausible because we don't know enough about him to know exactly what he's capable of. And I thought that this episode, we learned a lot about the Whites and the Night King. For one, I didn't realize that they were so organized. We saw them attack Hardhome, and you saw some level of organization there. But here you see that they can circle, they can flank, they even can show patience, knowing that the living can't wait as long as they can. And even when they were coming across the broken ice, they timed their walks to make sure that they weren't breaking it. These are intelligent creatures, if not being controlled by intelligent leadership.
You see, and I got a sense that there was a collective consciousness, that it wasn't they're almost robots, or they're being all controlled simultaneously by the White Walker that created them and resurrected them. There's a subconscious that appears. The Hound kicks their captive, and you can see the entire surrounding army of the dead react to it. When none of them couldn't all have seen it, but it was if they felt it. When the Hound throws the rock and hits one in the head, 2 or 3 left and right react with the same kind of twitch as if they were hit, whether that is, some collective conscious. And I mean, I just hope, I got to really hope. We learned also that if you kill the White Walker, all the whites that he's created just disappear. I just hope this doesn't turn into like the end of Independence Day, where they're going to, fly a biplane into the Night King, and you just kill that one White Walker, and the entire army of the dead just collapses. But it was an informative episode.
Yeah, and whenever you see any movie or show where you've got the collective conscious, whether it's the Borg or, as you mentioned, Independence Day, it's always foreshadowing that that's going to be part of the plan to destroy them, right? And I'm glad that they pointed it out, that all we got to do is take him out. But it's more complicated than that, right? The Night King isn't easy. He's not easy to kill, right? He's incredibly powerful. And I think that they did a great job in this episode of really illustrating the extent of his power, that it's not just numbers, that he alone is ferocious.
There was a couple other cool little pieces of information that we picked up. I think that Beric and Thoros have to have some kind of like flint, like a ring or something in their glove. The way they would strike their swords to get it ablaze, to me now it's clear it's more science and physics than it is magic. Did you notice that, or was that sound effect just to show metal on metal?
Yeah, it seemed that he scraped the glove across and it lit. Now, obviously, it doesn't have fuel on it, but maybe they also carry oil or something on them. But yeah, it does seem to be more illusion than divinity. I was a little surprised that the show had everybody with their unique weapons. I thought that was a little too much for me. It was a little two-handed lightsaber for me, where it was like, this guy's got 2 daggers. That guy's got a hammer. This guy's got an axe. That guy's got a sword. That guy's got a flaming sword. And even Jon with the Valyrian steel in Longclaw, it made that special ring every time he would use it. But again, they gave us enough substance in this episode to make the action palatable. It was enough contrast there, and I applaud the show. I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, we had somebody tweet in asking whether Jon had provided Dragon's Glass weapons and maybe some training for the group. Up until halfway through the episode, when they attacked that first small group of whites and the one White Walker, I'm like, where the hell is all the Dragon Glass weapons? And I'm like, God damn, I'm pissed. Then you see finally when their last retreat on the rock, you can clearly see that Jorah has a Dragon Glass dagger. So Jon, did provide them that. So I was glad they were paying attention. But you talk about everybody having a special weapon and a special ability. I now know why Gendry was part of this group. You needed to have somebody really fast and really strong that could believably make it back to Eastwatch in some kind of time to get a Raven out to save the day.
Some people might balk at this. At first viewing, a lot of people are like, wow, he's really fast. It took them days to get there, and he just got back so quickly. We never really established how long they're out there or how far they've traveled. And so in essence, it's not implausible that he can make it that far. And the same with the Raven going that distance and that speed. You got to assume that because we saw that ice form back, it's been a couple days. So I think the estimate was with a Raven, if it would take about 40 hours to get, if it just flew at top speed from the Wall to Dragonstone. Maybe it takes a couple hours for us. Let's say 2 days roundabout. And people have actually already calculated this on Reddit. So congratulations to you guys. Your math is quick. And then assuming Daenerys can fly just as quickly back, without too much pondering with Tyrion, I think that it's plausible that she got back in about 4 days turnaround. So those guys are freezing. They're near death. The ice reforms. again, it's not impossible for this to happen. And the same with Gendry. He could reasonably run that far. Although I'm with you on the first watch of it, I went, that's a little extreme.
No, I'm just glad that Daenerys conveniently had her winter riding outfit ready. So when this unexpected raven comes, but I wasn't saying that I thought Gendry was like super fast. That wasn't what I was saying, but thankfully you had a younger man who was in good shape. Could you picture how long would it have taken the Hound to get back? He wouldn't have made it halfway there. That whole group of old men, generally, they're all dead if you don't have a young strapping Gendry ready to run.
Yeah, if you had that group actually in a race, I think, I think probably
Jon wins.
Thoros would end up last.
Yeah, Jon probably, without Gendry. Gendry clearly wins.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So,
of course.
Jon.
Write in, host at shadontv.com. Let us know who would win that race, who would come in last, and why.
I like it. But the last thing that I think that we really learned on this was Littlefinger has done himself in. He's planted that final seed that's going to get him caught. When Sansa comes to Littlefinger for guidance, and she asks, where the hell did Arya get that letter from? And Littlefinger replies, I don't know. She's very resourceful. It's not going to be too hard for the sisters to get together next episode and realize Littlefinger's the one who requested it. Thus, he's lying. He's the one playing them against each other, even trying to have Sansa fear for her life that Arya's going to kill her. I think next week it's all going to come to a head, and I don't think it's going to work out too well for Littlefinger.
I think, speaking of Littlefinger and the way he plays that long game, that con game, I think we saw a contrast drawn here in this episode through dialogue that Tyrion, like Cersei, thinks in the long game. He thinks legacy. He thinks dynasty and kingdom. And Daenerys is, again, from her warrior background to the fire in her blood, she has an impatience. She's thinking short game. She wants to know, how do I get from here to crown on my head, where Tyrion is thinking long game. And I wonder if that's going to put Cersei at an advantage in any sort of negotiation with Daenerys. I also wonder, now that Daenerys has seen what is happening north of the wall, if she's even interested in Cersei and meeting with her, or if Cersei is just a roadblock at this point.
No, I'm glad. I'm glad they had the conversation. And we had an emailer write in for the Small Council, our listener email section episode last week, about a possibility of shift away from a monarchy into some form of democracy for a long, prolonged change, something that doesn't fluctuate with each leader that comes into power. And it's interesting they're having the conversation. I don't know where it's going to go, and I don't even want to take a guess at it, but it'll be interesting. I could see at this point, now that Daenerys has seen the dead rising, dealing with Cersei and thinking about sitting on a throne, it's not the most important thing to her. But a theme that kind of came up to me in this episode, and I'm going to kind of do a little research before tomorrow, is they're really driving home the Hound's fear of fire. In this episode alone, you had the Hound, freeze. He was paralyzed as Thoros is attacked by, granted, it was a terrifying, ratty, kind of rotted out, dead polar bear white, but he sat there frozen. He couldn't move. Then later they highlight when they're going to burn Thoros' body that he can't even look. He flinches away. I'm wondering if they're setting this up, towards the very end of the series, that the Hound will be forced to call upon and to, get over his fear of fire and possibly somehow embrace it.
Yeah, it seems like they're setting that up. And it is true too, much like we saw Theon react to the sum of his experiences. We're seeing the Hound here as well react. And again, it is showing that there are weaknesses in every character, right? Jon and Daenerys are impulsive. They get themselves in bad situations sometimes. You've got Tyrion can be overly cerebral and not act with enough ferocity. You've got, again, now here a fear of fire. You've got Theon with, his PTSD, essentially. So these characters all have flaws, and it's nice that the show recalls those flaws, doesn't make anybody perfect. And even Arya, in her malice that she displays in this episode, and the fact that she is both smart and lethal, there's flaws there too. She has difficulty relating. She's not a normal person anymore. We see Arya and Sansa having difficulty connecting, and I really enjoy the dialogue here. And again, I've complained that the show this season seems to be scant on dialogue. But this scene between Arya and Sansa, I thought the two scenes, really, the two primary scenes with them, were very powerful in their dialogue, what it tells you about the characters, what it tells you about who they really are after all this. Once they've been through this crucible of seasons, what's come out at the end, I thought they did a great job with this and other points of dialogue.
Yeah, it seems odd. They've compacted all into this one episode. This is what we've been complaining about the last few weeks, is it felt rushed because we weren't getting this motivational component of it. And I don't know how they could have, sprinkled these conversations in, because you couldn't through the last few episodes. You almost needed to have the group heading north. You needed to finally have the sisters being forced into this conversation. But it was nice to see that the show, I think a lot of the fears that the audience has and that we had, this episode, the writing is hopefully put it all to bed.
Yeah, if you treat season 7 as a 7-hour movie, it's actually got everything you wanted, right? It's got the action, it's got a little bit of romance now, and it's got a lot of powerful dialogue. We also have a little bit of comedy between Tormund and Gendry and the Hound. I loved Tormund's kind of like wild view of sexuality, challenging the relatively puritanical Westerosis, talking about dick and kind of little hints of homosexuality there.
No, I thought it was fantastic that they were just busting Gendry's balls. That, he was trying to say, how do they survive up here without freezing your balls off? And he said, well, you got to, we walk, we fight, we fuck. And he said, there's no women here. He goes, we'll do with what we have. And he looks at Gendry, and it's just fun that the banter was real. It was like life was back in the episode.
Yeah, and the best part was after that, when he just kind of comments on Gendry's intelligence to Jon. So yeah, you had that, and again, great lines between Gendry and the Hound as well. And then they can also take the dialogue deep, like you saw between Beric and Jon. That was some really there's some theology there. There was some real soul searching there, kind of the idea of what is purpose and how great does your purpose have to be.
Yeah, the dialogue was great and meaningful within the episode, but the callbacks and establishing the relationships that these characters have had made traveling north believable, made it seem like something you would do. But Tyrion's his impassioned plea to stop Dany from doing something reckless and getting on Drogon and flying north was some of the most powerful writing, and a scene that reminded me very much of Peter Dinklage's Best. When he was on trial, screaming at the court in the throne room in King's Landing, you could feel it tug at your heart.
What I really loved about this was that there was a rift between Daenerys and Tyrion, but they wrote it in such a way that there was respect between the two. I don't feel that they hate each other or loathe each other. Daenerys she is proud, and there is some reflection of that pride. And Tyrion, he's been humbled in the past, and so those two different constitutions are colliding here, but they're also playing off each other. I really liked it. And I think we can get really deep into a lot of this dialogue during the deep dive. But suffice it to say, this was some of the best writing I've seen of the season, perhaps the series.
Yeah, and you need the writing to make some of the decisions the characters make believable. Jon's decision to call Dany my queen on the boat trip back, reassuring her that the Northerners are going to see in her what he does. He obviously learned from that earlier conversation he had with Tormund about Mance Rayder, and that Mance was a great king beyond the wall, but he never bent a knee. And how many people had to die for his pride? That short, 2 or 3 sentences could have easily been forgotten. But it was so true to Jon to establish a lesson that someone who he respected had failed to see, and his pride had cost how many people, that Jon has learned, I'm not going to make that mistake. So when he decides to, even though he can't bend a knee because he's in bed, I didn't have a question about it. I said, this is a logical progression for Jon and Daenerys' relationship. So those relationships are key. And I had wrote out notes on some of the conversations with Jon's Suicide Squad and why it makes sense, and the interpersonal relationships that they discuss, and how you see that even though these men may appear to have nothing in common or no common goal or driver, they actually do. But we're at 22 minutes. I'm going to save that, I think, for tomorrow's deep dive, where I'll go into the history of some of the conversations, whether it was Thoros and Jorah discussing the Siege of Pike and their history there, and there's a lot to go into. So I think I'm going to pull that to tomorrow, but I want to talk about the final scene, which is what probably everybody's going to be talking about. Daenerys losing one of her children. Do you believe this was just an unfortunate set of circumstances, or were there any things in this scene that may have bothered you?
At first, I thought, where the hell did the Whites get a bunch of chains? Did they just have them laying around for any time a dragon decided to land there? And why did the Night King show up? How did they anticipate all this happening? I thought there's no way. I mean, he doesn't, clearly doesn't have knowledge, but you kind of came back with a different idea.
Well, over the weekend, I decided to go back and rewatch season 6. So I hit episode, I think it's 5, The Door, where Hodor, obviously is killed, and we see the creation of the first White Walker. And that, mountain shaped like an arrowhead is that exact same location where they had created the first White Walker, where Bran had that vision, where Bran had also had that encounter where the Night's King had marked him, all the exact locations. So I said, you know what? Maybe this is less that the White Walkers and the Whites are super slow. That people are saying, look where, in Reddit, I think, posted that giant map about where Jon had traveled is, compared to where the Whites had traveled. Maybe the Whites haven't been traveling slow. Maybe they've just been sitting in this very important location waiting for the Hound and this group to come north.
Yeah, it seems much more plausible. We know from the maps that have been drawn, especially the famous one on Reddit where it shows Jon Snow's travels versus the Walkers, and you can see that, he's traveled all over the world, and they're just kind of moving, 1 mile per hour here. And even when they see them, if you remember when they first catch sight of the Whites and they wonder where the rest of them are, that alone seems like they're probing, they're leaving bait out there, which leads to the question: how do they know?
Yeah, because the Night's King at the end, as Daenerys flies away, he looks pleased with himself. He looks happy. This was mission accomplished. And the underlying tone I got was that they were somewhat expecting this, that just as the Night King knew that Bran would be there, maybe somehow, whether he fed, I don't want to create some crazy fan theory here, but could he have created the vision in the fire for the Hound, knowing it would pull them north? It's possible. But it got me thinking about just the math, right? Because we see the Night King, and he generally has what looks like 4 lieutenants with him. So I was wondering, how many White Walkers are there? And the only thing that we really have to gauge upon from the show is the episode where the last of Craster's babies was converted, where we had the big reveal that you see how they're turned into a White Walker. At that point, you had the Night King and 12 additional White Walkers behind him. So let's just say at this point we have 13. Since then, Jon has killed 2. He killed the one tonight. He killed the one at Hardhome. We see the Night King tonight flanked by 4. Where are the other 6? And where are the Whites that they command?
Oh, I'm led to believe that they're actually even more than that. They don't necessarily need to all convene at the same place. There's a lot that's unknown about this world north of the Wall, and I think that makes it very exciting that they don't quite know what they're up against. You could see, presumably, in Season 8 that everything we think we know about them is completely wrong, and I think it will develop. Again, you got to remember that we've got hours and hours and hours of the show left, and we keep feeling like the next episode will be the last, but it's not even close to the last. You've still got several motion pictures ahead of you worth of content.
But what you discussed, the chains, to me, that's the biggest tell. It looks like this location in warmer times could have been some kind of dock or some kind of shipping area, because there's a moment where you see some of the chain links kind of off to the side. So it could be explained away that this location just happened to have those giant chains, but it's impractical. I don't see how you would have all the required components to salvage a dragon from ice.
Look, there's 2 different ways to look at this, Big D. One is you could say this is a bit of really hokey writing, where that they encountered the Night King specifically at this place. They got chased, and there happened to be some ice. Then they got pinned on this rock, and then a dragon came and rescued them. And the Night King happened to take it out, and then they happened to have some chains and pull the dragon out. Now that's the negative, hokey way to look at it. But if you flip that, just like you said, the Night King got to decide where this battle took place. He got to decide when. they were waiting. If they knew somebody was coming north to get one of them or even to probe them, they know exactly where they want to lay this trap. And so then it makes perfect sense. You do it in a place where they can be surrounded. You do it in a place where they do have this pit they can fall into. You do it in a place where you know that the dragons will have to be brought out. And in that case, it actually makes a lot of sense. Now, again, this all hinges on the fact that either he could provoke them via visions or that he has some knowledge of what's going on south of the wall. I hope that they explore that in later episodes.
Yeah, I'm looking for it. I want to turn around right now. I don't want to edit. I want to go watch it again. But I got to sit here, edit this, and try to get it out for everyone tonight on the West Coast and the East Coast commuters in the morning.
I'm going to get some Indian food and grab a beer and then watch it all over again. So I'm glad you're doing all the heavy lifting here.
Glad to help.
All right, that concludes this week's episode of Shat on TV Game of Thrones edition. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat on TV. Facebook, search for Shat on TV Podcast. The website is shatontv.com. And the email is hosts@shatontv.com. If you've got any ideas about what we said on the Instacast, anything that you'd like to highlight, or any theories going forward, please let us know. Also, if we made any mistakes on this Instacast, which I'm sure we did.
Bound to happen.
Hashtag actually in your tweets or email us with the subject line actually, and we'll be sure to look those over and include those in a future recording. We're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe, and if you stop by iTunes, please do leave a review. That helps the podcast grow. On behalf of my co-host, Big D Dick Ebert, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us Tuesday night, where we flesh out these ideas and more on our deep dive. Thanks for listening, and as always, be sure to knock twice before joining us on the throne.